Well, thank you very much for joining us today. This is Patrick at Qdabra, and we're bringing you another short webinar. This topic today is new. We created this webinar just for you. I'm happy to have you here. We didn't get our webinar invite out until very late, so I'm really happy that we got as many people as we did today. Welcome to our webinar. I've got Mel Clemente with me, and she's going to be talking about the technique. She is responsible, and to her credit, we were able to get the webinar out this week. So I want to say thanks to Mel up front here because she did a great job with this demo that you're going to see in a moment. So today we're talking about automatically logging out users. And this is something that's really important. We're going to show you how to detect them in active state. We're going to show you how to prompt them. Are you still there? And then switch to a logout view to say you've been logged out. We're also going to show you how to save the form automatically so they don't lose any data. And that's what we're talking about today. So it should be a short 20-minute webinar, maybe even less time. Why are we showing you this technique? And I guess I should have asked Mel if you could hear me. We're recording. Mel, how's the audio?
You sound great.
Thanks. Yeah, so why log out users? Well, number one, when we're working in the browser, those browser session states can be transitory if somebody sleeps their computer. If they keep their computer on and it's connected to the internet, then the session state will go beyond 30 minutes. But as soon as the machine is disconnected in some way, whether it goes to sleep or they lose their Wi-Fi connection, then the browser session state will time out after 30 minutes. So when that happens, people come back to their form and they get some strange error, which is not a happy user experience. So number two, we want to prevent that, and we obviously don't want to lose any data. That's number one. We want to prevent the user from seeing a strange error message. That's number two. And then we want to keep people from hogging forms. So if you've got users who keep forms open and they got their Chrome browser, which is about 90% of the market now, if they're using Chrome and they can see a gazillion tabs, they're just like, not closing out their work, no one else can access the form. So we want to kind of have some way to, I think, incentivize people to stay active and finish the task, right? That's number three. Allow other people to access data. Sometimes you've got forms where you want multiple people to access it, and this is a great technique for that because it will automatically log them out if they're not active. And then lastly, we do want to prevent unauthorized access. If somebody leaves their desktop, we don't want the form to just stay there so people can either see the data or edit the data. So that's a security benefit as well. So those are the four reasons why we're logging out users. So we'll quickly demo for you here, and I've got a form that we created in Forms Viewer. It's actually an InfoPath form that we're showing in Forms Viewer. And just to give you an idea of what the form looks like, so it's a pretty stock form. You can see that we've got some sections in here that we're going to be displaying. It looks a lot plainer, a lot simpler in InfoPath than it does in Forms Viewer, and that's because Mel's using this really clever technique, which is to load a custom cascading style sheet, CSS, which makes it look really cool. Background color, gradient, the rounded corners, and it's a responsive design, so I can scrunch up my window, and you'll see a part of it. So I'm just going to wait here for a second, and you'll see in a minute here, I'm going to actually type in my name. You saw there that it automatically blanked it out. Now, if one of the downsides of this technique is that if you're typing in a field, and it's 15 seconds, I think, that we're waiting for, and if it tries to check for inactive, it's going to compare the state of the form with the previous state to see if it's changed. And when it does that, it takes a minute. It takes a very microsecond, and then you see it'll check. Now I've got 10 seconds now, so the first thing it does is it pops up that overlay, which is your session is going to expire in 10 seconds. If I click on continue, I'm good. I can type in my address, and we'll wait again another 12 seconds here. In fact, I'm going to time it, and then we'll see that we're going to wait. This time we're not going to click continue. We're just going to wait for the pop-up, and then we're going to let it time out in 10 seconds after that. So this, for the purpose of the demo, we've artificially set the timer to 15 seconds and 10 seconds. In your forms, obviously, you're going to want to make it like 5 minutes and 15 seconds or 20 seconds for this. You'll see now, if I continue waiting in a second here, it's going to save the form and switch to a different section here. And you can see that happening right now. And voila. So we have saved the form. Ideally, you want to put a link in here so they could reopen it if need be. But you can see we did say, hey, by the way, it was saved just a few seconds ago. And if I go to my library, and you can see there it is. So I just refreshed it. And of course, this is the same form that I just it automatically saved it. I didn't have to click submit. It automatically saved it when it logged me out. And if we were to wait here again, after opening it from the modern library, you'll see it one more time. Now we're going to walk through what we showed, the demo, and how we did it, and then Mel's going to actually go into more detail and show you what you need to do to modify your current form. It's a very cool technique. In fact, I recommend using this technique for all of your forms because there are some cases where it doesn't make as much sense, but it's very similar to having a dashboard that automatically refreshes. So we're just going to wait for it to expire one more time here. And if you get questions, now would be a good time maybe to send them to me. So I'm going to close this out and go back to the library. Let's make sure that it was updated correctly. And you can see that it's creating 2 copies. So there is a bug there. This is a live demo. So you can see that it created an additional one when I opened the old one because I changed my name. So no big deal. But okay, let's go back to our webinar presentation. So how are we detecting inactive users? So there's a timer resource. There's a little bit of JavaScript behind this form that automatically triggers a refresh every, in this case, 15 seconds, but you'd want to do it 5 minutes or something like that. And it is very similar to, like I said, a dashboard that requeries every 5 minutes. There's database stuff that's changed and you want to query it from a dashboard form. The best practice there is to automatically just requery. And then you see that the people always see the most recent data. And that way you can put up a monitor in your workspace, maybe for everyone to see, and as they're walking by, that they've got the latest and greatest information. That's great for dashboards to have that requery. We did a webinar on that, so if you're looking at our webinar page, you can search for, I believe it is refresh is the name in the title. And then we just check to see if it's changed. So the way we check to see if the document has changed is we're just storing the XML value in a field, and then we compare it to the form again to see if anything has changed. It's kind of crude, but it works well in this case. And then finally, if you want, you can actually also add like fields in your main data source when you're paging. So let's say you have a long form, and maybe you're not editing information or entering information a lot, but you're paging through information, you're scrolling down, you're clicking on sections to hide and show them. Well, you can add counters in your form's main data source to prevent the refresh from happening. I mean, you don't have to. You can obviously prompt them again, but if they're actually looking at something and they're paging through data, maybe you don't want to bother them. So in that case, you'd have to just add a field to your main data source. And when they were doing some action in the form, say scrolling or paging to a different page or hiding or showing a section, then you just set those counters. And because you're setting the main data source, the comparison will run and it will see that something has changed and it won't prompt the user. Okay, so then once we've detected that nothing has changed, we show this overlay pop up. And this is a technique that we've covered in the past. You can search for overlay techniques. We've got it in our Forms Zero Labs. So you're adding a section to your form that is an overlay section, and there's a secondary timer that runs in a smaller increment. In this case, it's 10 seconds. And another nice cool thing about this form, and Mel is going to show it in a minute, is that we have rounded corners both in the overlay and in the thing behind it. So it's really a cool looking design. And then of course, if they don't do anything, we switch them to a separate section, and we're ideally, like I said, providing a link so they can reopen the form, and then automatically saving it so they don't lose any data. So that's pretty much it. The reason why we're automatically saving it, obviously, is because we don't want to lose the data, and we're indicating on that screen that they did get it saved, and so they're happy. They know that their data was not lost. And ideally, you'd also want to show the version of the XML, so for comparison purposes. So that's pretty much it for the quick demo. I'm going to pass the mic to Mel, and she's going to talk about how she did this technique. Mel, are you there?
I'm here. If you can make me the presenter, please.
There you go. Thanks for being here.
Yep, thanks. So yeah, that cool technique is done by first adding the data connections, and we actually plan to create an XML template part, an XTP, to make it even easier for users to just add this cool technique into their existing forms with less effort on their part, right? But if you're adding, right now we don't have the XTP yet, but if you're going to add this from scratch, first you got to add the form logic, XML data connection, and the refresh data connection. So we've got our resource files for those, and of course you're going to need key roles and your SharePoint library submit so that the autosave knows where to save your form, right? So then we go to, everything actually happens in this form logic actions, and then this tick attribute here. So, okay, before I show you that, let me switch you to the finish loading. So on load, these are just this is the gradient background. It's optional if you already have something going on with your design with your background stuff, you can just get rid of that. Overlay files, this is pretty important because you want to display the expiry message in an overlay section. And then the refresh, this is where we load the resource file for the refresh data connection. First, you set the refresh seconds attribute of that XML data source into how many seconds you want to refresh. All right, and then determine environment is just for this sample form. You can publish it right straight into your Forms Viewer instance, and you won't have to update the submit data connection. Okay, and then going back to the refresh. Oh, sorry, and the form logic, the tick stuff here. This is what checks. So once the form loads that resource XML, it's gonna start looping through this through these rules in this field, in this attribute. Okay, so we've got all these rules. The algorithm works as if it's checking if you're already logged out, and it stops there, right? And then it checks for whether, if you're already showing the prompt, the expiry prompt, are you going to be logged out after 10 seconds? So we specify that constant right here. So this is our 10 seconds there. So after 10 seconds and you have not clicked on that continue button, it will should log out equals true. And if it's true, then we auto save. We call the save rules in here. Okay. And then if we're just showing the prompt, we stop there because we're waiting for the user to either click on continue or not do anything. And the rest of these rules are just checking the main data source, the last saved state versus the last changed state versus the current one. Okay. So that's essentially the logic there. And then we have these sections. This is going to contain your form controls, form sections, what have you. You just need to make sure that when the users are already been logged out, you have this conditional formatting to hide the section. And you can also do this in a view, like when the user didn't click continue, switch to a separate view. It's really up to you there. But if you're using just one, you're going to go with the conditional formatting. Okay. Then in here, when the user is actually logged out, that's the only time we show this section. So should logout is not equal to true, then hide it. And then this one is just the opposite of those two. Okay. Then we got some rules going on here, just basically refreshing everything. Your submit is calling the save rules that is centralized so that we can run them during autosave and during manual save, right? So we set the form name, submit to the library, and then we set the last saved date and time stamps. I think that's it. Let me talk about the overlay stuff real quick here. I know we have a separate webinar for it, but just a quick idea here. Let me edit the XSL because there would be some manual updates to the XSL, the view XSL, where you're showing the overlay pop-up. You simply add these two div tags into your overlay section. So in this case, this is my section where I'm showing your session will expire in blah, blah, blah seconds, right? And then so I enclose those within these div overlay tags. And that should do the trick. It should auto pop up. We're controlling the formatting via a separate CSS file there. So you're seeing like a different color in that overlay and blacks out the background. Yeah, pretty cool.
Mel, the way thanks, Mel. This is great. So when they add that overlay section, I mean, we have notes we're going to send as part of the package. We've got a little Word document file with some notes in it. But just for everyone's just to reiterate, what they'll do is they'll open the XSLT file and they'll search for the text. Your session will expire in 10 seconds, and then they'll add those two div tags at the bottom, like you see there, right? The overlay and the overlay section.
That's right. Yeah.
That's it, right? That's the only manual change they have to make, right? Is that the only?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah, that's it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much for presenting. We had one question here from Pete, and that is, can you talk more about the value of locking and unlocking forms? So, obviously, when you have forms, you don't want people to be editing the same form at the same time because they're saving it as one file, and there could be contention, there could be people overwriting one another. So the best practice, and Mel actually covered a couple other best practices today in her explanation, centralized logic, putting the sections in one view versus having separate views. But the best practice for form management, or for form, what do you want to call it, is to lock the form. Now, if you open the form in the browser using the InfoPath Form Services, you may recall that InfoPath Form Services never locked the form. It was always, I think, am I sharing my screen out yet? I'm not. Here we go. So hopefully you can see my screen now. But the Form Services were never actually locking the forms either. So we had to automatically check out the form and then check it in. And we've done webinars in the past where we showed logic to automatically lock the form using a separate list. And the benefit there is that that one person has the baton, so to speak, and they're the one that's editing the file. Now, in situations where you have dashboard forms and where you're editing a lot of data in a database or in a list, there can be instances where you want people to write data at the same time, and you'll have one form open and they'll both be, multiple people will be editing information and hitting submit, and that's fine because that's going to separate records in a list into a database. So you're not dealing with the document structure in that case. But whenever you're dealing with the document structure, you do want to lock and unlock it. And this technique then would be useful in that scenario because you would automatically unlock the form after they were logged out, and therefore allowing other people to go in, open it, and change something. Hopefully that answers the question, Pete. I'm so sorry for the long-winded response. Thanks for asking it. And I just want to quickly call out our Forms Viewer folks out there. This is a Forms Viewer technique. Obviously, we're using InfoPath Designer still, but we are working to get the designer done so you can actually edit the canvas in the browser. That's our #1 focus this year. We just did release Form 04.1, which includes a number of features. Hopefully you got the email. We added support for validation. We added support for printing list forms and a bunch of other really cool things. If you're interested, let me know. Form 0 is the only, it's the lowest cost migration path for your existing InfoPath forms because it doesn't require much change. I mean, obviously, whenever you migrate a form, you probably want to take advantage of some of these new features that we have, like mobile CSS, and responsive design, the automatic logout feature. These are features that only Form 0 supports. So adding those features doesn't take a lot of time. Mel, what do you think? Maybe it's a 30-minute operation to update an existing form. Do we think we have it down to a short amount of?
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, with 30 minutes or so. And we also recommend doing things like making the data connections dynamic, so you can move a form from dev to test to production without having to change the actual XSN. Data-driven design is important, not just for the data connections, but it's also important for other data in the form that's static or that changes infrequently, or even that changes frequently. So as you're not having to update the form every time you change the layout of the form or change the text in the form. So anyway, that's it for our webinar today. I want to thank you all for joining us. We are doing a webinar on Power Apps next week, so Hillary will be presenting. And then we're probably going to do a webinar on best practices, summarizing the 10 top techniques. And then we have Form 0 training at the end of July. We'll be sending out an email with that information, probably in a week or two. Hope you guys are having a great summer there. We've got a short 4-question, 5-question quiz, and then we'll send you the package with the instructions on how to do this, the sample that you saw in the demo, and hope you have a great day. Thank you. Thanks, Mel. Awesome job.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, everybody. Take care.